The young man's voice cut across the range like a gunshot, loud enough for 30 people to hear, and John Wayne turned around slowly, his jaw set, his eyes flat and cold. Notice, because what Wayne did in the next 60 seconds wasn't what anyone expected from a man his size and his temper, and it cost him something he didn't get back for a very long time. The California sun hung low over the Ventura Sporting Club as John Wayne pulled his truck into the gravel lot. It was October 1973. He was 66 years old, and he'd had a harder month than most people knew. His back had been giving him trouble since the summer. His doctor had told him things he didn't want to hear, things he hadn't repeated to anyone. The industry he'd spent 40 years building had started to whisper about him in ways that made his chest tight when he lay awake at 3 in the morning. Yesterday's Cowboy, a relic, the Old West that nobody wanted anymore. But this wasn't a day for any of that. This was the one place in Southern California where John Wayne could still be just a man with a gun and a target. The Ventura Sporting Club, where he'd been a member for nearly a decade. He grabbed his gun case from the truck bed. Old leather, worn at the corners, the kind of case that told you something about the man who carried it. He headed for the clubhouse without hurrying, because John Wayne didn't hurry unless there was a reason. Inside, the attendant behind the counter, a young man named Pete who worked most Saturdays, looked up with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Wayne, good afternoon." Wayne set his membership card on the counter. "Busy today, more than usual," Pete said. "There's a group on the competition range." He paused. "Mr. Eastwood is here." "Clint Eastwood." "Yes, sir. Came in about an hour ago. Brought a couple of people with him." Wayne's hand rested flat on the counter for a moment. He picked up his card. "Is that right?" Not a question. More like a man filing something away. "Lane 8 is open if you want some distance from them," Pete offered carefully. "I'll take lane 8, Wayne said, and walked through without another word. Notice what he didn't do. He didn't stop. He didn't ask what Eastwood was doing there. Didn't ask who was with him. Didn't show anything on his face. John Wayne had spent 40 years learning how to keep his face still when his blood was moving fast beneath it. He walked out onto the range and found lane 8 at the far end, away from the voices and laughter coming from the competition area, and he set down his case and opened it with the methodical care of a man who respected his equipment. His revolver lay in its foam padding. A Colt single action, not a showpiece. Not an engraved collector's item, just a working gun that he'd maintained and practiced with for 15 years. He'd been shooting competitively since the early 1950s, had won fast draw competitions that nobody in Hollywood liked to talk about because it didn't fit the image they'd built around him. The studios wanted the image. Wayne wanted the skill. He'd kept both, on his own terms. He loaded 6 chambers and stepped to the line. He wasn't aware of them approaching until the voice arrived. Loud, deliberate, carrying over the ambient noise of the range the way a voice does when it wants to be heard by more than just the person it's aimed at. Well, look who it is. The Duke himself. Wayne lowered his revolver and turned. 3 men were walking over from the competition area. Clint Eastwood in the lead, lean and tall at 43, 23 years younger than Wayne, wearing a plain shirt and that narrow, watchful expression he'd made famous in a dozen films. 2 other men flanked him, one in his 40s with the bearing of a studio type, the other younger, maybe 35, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to prove much. "Afternoon," Wayne said. His voice was level. Eastwood stopped a few feet away and looked at Wayne's lane, then at his gun case, then back at his face. The look said something without saying it. The kind of look that's designed to make a man feel he's being assessed and found wanting. "Didn't expect to see you here," Eastwood said. "Thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere with rocking chairs." The studio type laughed. The younger man grinned. Wayne looked at Eastwood for a moment without speaking. He'd heard the things Eastwood had been saying in interviews, not just about westerns in general, but specifically about the kind of westerns Wayne made. Sentimental, dishonest, a mythology built for people who couldn't handle the truth. Eastwood had a way of saying it that sounded like analysis when it was really just a younger man swinging at an older one who couldn't swing back without looking afraid. "I'm comfortable enough," Wayne said. Eastwood tilted his head. "You know, I've been thinking about your movies, the new ones." Wayne waited. "They've got a certain quality to them." He let the pause do the work. Like watching someone try very hard to be something they used to be. The studio type laughed again. The range had gone quieter around them. Other shooters had started to drift over, sensing something. The smell of gun oil and dust hung in the warm October air, cut occasionally by the dry bite of spent powder drifting over from the competition range. "Look," Eastwood continued, his voice carrying that soft, unhurried quality that he used when he wanted to seem generous while delivering something sharp. "I'm not saying you don't have a place in the industry. I'm saying the industry's changed. The audience has changed. They don't want the hero on the white horse anymore. They want something real, something complicated, and maybe that's just not something you can give them at this point. Wayne's jaw tightened once. Just once. Then it went still again. Before we go on, you need to understand something about John Wayne that most people got wrong. His temper was real. It had always been real. The men who'd worked with him for 40 years knew that there was something underneath the controlled exterior that was large and hot and capable of doing genuine damage if it got loose. What those same men also knew, the ones who'd been around long enough, was that Wayne had spent decades learning to make that thing useful instead of destructive. He didn't suppress it. He aimed it. The thing about complicated, Wayne said, his voice dropping into that register that carried without needing to be raised, is that any man can make something complicated. You throw enough shadow into a frame and call it depth. He let that sit for a second. Making something true. Now that takes something else. Eastwood's eyes sharpened slightly. Wayne had surprised him. He'd expected the old man to get red-faced, to bluster, to give him something he could use. You think your movies are true, Eastwood said. I think they're honest, Wayne said, about what men can be when they choose to be something. You want to make pictures about what men are when they've given up choosing. That's your business. But don't stand on my range and tell me my way is wrong because yours sells tickets. The crowd had grown now. 25, maybe 30 people, watching from a respectful but fascinated distance. Someone had come out of the clubhouse and was standing in the doorway. A boot creaked on the wooden decking somewhere behind the crowd. Then silence again. Your range, Eastwood said with a small smile. Right. The thing about that is, Duke, and he put a slight emphasis on the nickname that made it sound like a costume. I've been hearing that this is your range, your genre, your West, for a long time. And I keep looking around and noticing that the audiences aren't really agreeing with you on that anymore. The younger man with Eastwood spoke up. No offense, Mr. Wayne, but when's the last time you had a picture that people actually turned out for? A real picture, not just a name above the title. Wayne looked at him. The younger man's confidence flickered just slightly under the weight of that look. Then Wayne looked back at Eastwood. You want to have this conversation, he said. Let's have it properly. Eastwood raised an eyebrow. You and me, 50 yards, 6 shots each. We'll see what kind of cowboy you actually are outside of the frame Sergio Leone built around you. Listen, because this is the moment that mattered. Eastwood could have laughed it off, could have said he wasn't there to compete, that he'd just come to practice, that he had better things to do than play target games with a man trying to hold on to something that was slipping away from him. Any of those responses would have been safe. Instead, Eastwood met Wayne's eyes and said, quietly, 50 yards with what? Revolvers. Wayne held up the Colt in his hand, like the ones we both made our names with. The crowd buzzed softly. The rangemaster, an older man named Frank, came over from his station. Gentlemen, he looked between them. What's going on here? A friendly competition, Wayne said, without looking away from Eastwood. Eastwood and I are going to shoot. 50 yards, 6 rounds each. Standard bullseye targets. Frank looked at Eastwood, who gave a small nod. Then I'll set it up proper, Frank said. Clean competition. No nonsense. As Frank walked down range to set the targets, the crowd settled into the particular silence of people who know they're about to see something they'll remember. Money changed hands in murmured exchanges. A woman in a shooting vest, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, stood near the back and watched with an expression that gave nothing away. Eastwood's studio companion leaned in close. Clint, you sure about this? 50 yards with a revolver against Wayne? Wayne's been shooting competitively since before you were making spaghetti westerns. Eastwood's jaw moved slightly. I'm sure. Wayne stood at his lane and loaded his Colt with the unhurried focus of a man who'd done this 10,000 times. His hands were steady. The back pain was still there, a dull insistence at the base of his spine, but pain was something Wayne had learned to set aside the way you set a tool down when you don't need it for the next job. Frank signaled from downrange. Targets are set. Wayne, you want to shoot first or second? Frank called back. Second, Wayne said. Eastwood stepped to the line. The crowd went quiet. Whatever Eastwood had said, whatever tone he'd taken, he was a serious man with a serious reputation, and anyone who'd watched him work on set knew he didn't do anything carelessly. He raised his revolver with the measured calm of someone who'd spent considerable time learning how not to rush. His arm was steady, his breathing was controlled. Bang! He didn't wait to check. He adjusted and fired again. Bang, 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 bang. 6 shots in roughly 25 seconds. Eastwood lowered the revolver and stepped back. His expression gave nothing away. Frank walked to the target and examined it carefully. Then he turned. 6 shots. 5 in the bullseye, 1 just outside. 7-inch grouping. Total score 53 out of 60. The crowd responded with genuine appreciation. That was real shooting. Competition-level shooting at a difficult distance. Several people looked at Wayne now with expressions that said they understood what he was facing. The smell of spent powder hung sharp in the still October air. Wayne walked to the line. He stood there for a moment without raising the gun. He looked at the target at 50 yards, which from where he stood was a small pale circle in the distance, and he breathed in through his nose and let the breath out slow and deliberate. The crowd was completely still. Eastwood was watching from slightly off to the side, his arms loose at his sides, his face careful and unreadable. Here's what John Wayne was thinking, standing at that line. Not about Eastwood, not about the crowd, not about the whispers in the industry, not about what his doctor had told him or what the box office numbers had said last quarter. He was thinking about a range in Texas in 1952, where a retired Army colonel had watched him shoot for the first time and told him, "Son, the gun doesn't care what you're feeling. The gun only knows what your hands are doing. You want to shoot true, you get your hands right, and then you get out of your own way." John Wayne got out of his own way. He raised the Colt, his arm extended with the natural, unhurried confidence of long practice. His eyes found the sights, and then everything else. The crowd, the competition, the accumulated weight of 40 years of being John Wayne in public. All of it went somewhere else, and there was only the gun, and the target, and the space between them. Bang. He didn't rush. He never rushed. He never rushed. Bang. The recoil was the same as it always was, familiar and manageable. Just physics, just mechanics. Bang. Bang. His breathing stayed slow. His grip stayed firm but not tight. Not clutching, just holding. Bang. One more. Bang. He lowered the Colt. His arm was steady. He could feel his pulse in his ears, but his hands were still. Frank walked down range. The crowd didn't make a sound. Even the ambient noise of the range seemed to have withdrawn. Eastwood stood with his arms at his sides and watched Frank approach the target, and something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not quite uncertainty, but a recalibration. One step, one stare, one result. Frank reached the target and stopped. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned around. His voice carried across the range with the deliberate care of a man who understood what he was announcing. 6 shots, all 6 in the bullseye. 3.5-inch grouping. Total score, 60 out of 60. The sound that came from the crowd was not quite an explosion. It was more like a long exhale that had been building for 10 minutes, released all at once into something between applause and stunned murmuring. The silver-haired woman in the shooting vest clapped slowly and steadily. The studio type with Eastwood had his mouth open. The younger man was staring at the target in Frank's hands as if he could make the numbers change by looking at them hard enough. Eastwood stood very still. Frank brought both targets back and held them up for the crowd to see. Eastwood's target was excellent work. 5 tight in the bullseye, 1 just out, a grouping that would have made most competition shooters satisfied. Wayne's target showed 6 holes, so close together they nearly made a single ragged opening in the center. "That's," Wayne said from the line, his voice carrying only what it needed to. "That." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He walked back to his case and began unloading the spent casings from his Colt, with the same methodical care he'd loaded them. The crowd was still processing what had happened. Eastwood walked over to him. Wayne didn't look up from what he was doing. He continued working through the chambers one by one, cleaning as he went the way he always did. That was, Eastwood started, and then stopped. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the carrying quality it had had before. That was exceptional shooting. Wayne set the last casing aside and looked up. "I've been shooting since before you were old enough to hold one," he said, "and I'll be shooting after the last theater in this country stops running your films." He paused. "That's not a criticism. That's just how it is. That's just how it is. That's just how it is." Eastwood was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You said you thought your movies were honest, about what men can be when they choose to be something." Wayne nodded once. "I meant it. Maybe you were right," Eastwood said. His voice was careful and measured, the way a man's voice is when he's saying something that costs him something. "I've been treating what you built like it was an obstacle, like I had to knock it down to build something next to it. The thing is, High Plains Drifter exists because of what you made. Everything I've done in this genre exists because of what you made. I shouldn't have come at you like that." Wayne studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "You shoot pretty well, for a man who makes pictures about giving up." Eastwood's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. 53 out of 60 isn't giving up." "No," Wayne agreed. "It isn't." A new voice entered from the direction of the clubhouse. "John, That's some of the finest marksmanship I've seen in my career, and I've seen quite a bit of it." Everyone turned. An older man in his 70s, distinguished bearing, white hair, a jacket that suggested a long military career, was walking across the range. "Colonel Patterson," Frank said with visible surprise. "Didn't know you were here today." "Paperwork," Patterson said. "Heard what was happening and came out to watch." He stopped near Wayne and extended his hand. "Duke, it's been too long." Wayne shook it. "Ray, didn't know you were still a member here." Patterson turned to look at Eastwood. "And you are Clint Eastwood, the actor?" "Yes, sir." Patterson nodded slowly. "Before that, Fort Ord, Army, 1951 to 1953. Eastwood's expression shifted. "That's right. You placed third in the All-Army Pistol Championship in 1952, Patterson said. "Third out of how many?" 2,000 competitors. He paused. "And you were shooting standard issue equipment while the top finishers had custom rigs." The crowd absorbed this in silence. "That score you just put up," Patterson continued, 53 out of 60 at 50 yards with a revolver. "That's a trained shooter's score." He looked at Wayne. "And what you just did, Duke. In 20 years of running military marksmanship programs, I've seen that kind of grouping from 2 or 3 people." His voice carried no flattery, only the flat precision of a man stating an observed fact. Wayne absorbed this without showing much. He said, "Ray, you always did have a way of showing up at the right moment." Patterson smiled briefly. "I try." He looked between the two men. "Whatever brought you to the point of a competition at 50 yards, the outcome seems to have clarified things." He left it there, which was the right thing to leave. Eastwood looked at Wayne. He'd been quiet through Patterson's remarks, processing something. Then he said, "The fast draw work you did in the 50s, the competition circuit, would you be willing to show me? Not to compete, just," he paused, "just to learn." Wayne looked at him for a long moment. The crowd had gone quiet again, watching to see what the moment required. Remember, this was a man who'd come in throwing elbows 30 minutes ago, and was now asking to be taught something. That kind of shift either means something, or it means nothing, and John Wayne had been reading men long enough to know the difference. "Tell you what," Wayne said finally, "you come back here next Saturday morning. I'll show you what I know about fast draw, and you tell me what it was about making that drift picture that you thought was worth the darkness you put in it." Eastwood held his eye. "Fair enough, because there are things you did in your pictures," Wayne continued, his voice still holding that careful quality. "Things about how a man stands when he's deciding something." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eastwood nodded once. He understood. They didn't shake hands that afternoon. That came later. What happened instead was something quieter and more durable. 2 men who had come to a shooting range carrying different kinds of weight, and who left carrying slightly less of it, because something had been acknowledged that needed acknowledging, and something had been proven that had needed proving, and the proving had been done the right way. Frank stopped Wayne on his way back through the clubhouse. "Mr. Wayne," he had the result sheet in his hand. "What do you want done with this?" Wayne looked at it. The numbers were there in Frank's careful handwriting. 60 out of 60. "Put it on the wall," he said. "Right alongside the others. Not special. Just alongside." He drove home as the California sun turned the hills gold and orange in that particular October way. His back ached. He was tired in the way that a day of real effort makes you tired, which is different from the kind of tired that just accumulates without being earned. He sat on the porch with a glass of water and watched the light go out of the sky, thinking about what Eastwood had said in the darkness in those pictures. He wasn't ready to say he'd been wrong, but he was honest enough, sitting alone in the October dark, to admit that dismissing something because it made you uncomfortable was not the same as understanding it well enough to dismiss it. The journalists found out by Monday. By Tuesday, the version circulating through Hollywood had Wayne shooting at 100 yards in a thunderstorm, blindfolded. Wayne let it go. The following Saturday, Eastwood came back. They worked for 3 hours. Wayne showed him the fast draw mechanics he'd learned in the 50s. The weight distribution, the grip angle, the way the draw worked when it was right and broke down when you tried to force it. Eastwood was a good student, which Wayne had expected. Men who were serious about their craft were usually good students when they found something they didn't know. In exchange, Eastwood talked about High Plains Drifter, about what he'd been trying to do, what he'd found when he looked at the Western from the outside. Wayne listened without agreeing, and without arguing. He asked 3 questions, all specific, about choices Eastwood had made. Eastwood answered directly, without defensiveness. They didn't resolve anything, but they talked about the same thing honestly, from different positions, which was more than they'd managed a week ago. Word got around, the way word does. What it actually was 2 men who'd found a place where none of the noise meant anything, where what mattered was the gun and the target, and the distance between them, and whether you could hold yourself still enough to close that distance with precision. Wayne had built his life on that kind of stillness. On a set, it translated into something an audience could feel without naming it. On a range, it translated into a 3.5-inch grouping at 50 yards, all 6 shots, no exceptions. The target from that October afternoon, the 60 out of 60, hung on the wall at the Ventura Sporting Club alongside the records of 100 other shooters. Not in a special place, not framed differently, just on the wall the way Frank had been told to put it. Most people who came in didn't know whose score it was. Some of the ones who were told found it hard to believe. What Wayne knew, and what he'd always known, was that the doing of a thing was its own answer to the question of whether you could do it. You could argue about art and genre, and what the West meant, and whether the myth of it served anyone anymore. You could have that argument until the sun went down and came back up. Or you could pick up a gun and walk to the line and find out what the distance between you and the target actually was, and let that be what it was. John Wayne walked to the line. He breathed. He aimed. He didn't rush. That was enough. That was always enough. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. And if you want to hear what happened the night a studio executive showed up at Wayne's trailer with an offer he was supposed to refuse and didn't, tell me in the comments. That's a different story. But it starts in the same place this one does, with a man who knew exactly what he was worth and wasn't willing to pretend otherwise.